Here at Alamo Music, we have the Ensoniq ESQ-1. It's a great synthesizer. There's a lot of stuff to it. Let's check it out. Hello, I'm Roland Perez. This is Alamo Music Center, San Antonio, Texas. Check out our website, please, alamomusic.com. Hop on the YouTube channel, Alamo Music Sound Lab, and click subscribe. We've got a lot of great videos that we had in the past, and we got a lot more coming up in the future. Today, we'll be talking about one of my favorite synthesizers from the 80s, the Ensoniq ESQ-1. We'll talk a lot about the company, how it started, and how it went through some changes and trouble. And then we'll get a chance to listen to this awesome, classic, very cost-effective synthesizer. Stay tuned. The Ensoniq ESQ-1. What a fantastic synthesizer. This bad boy came out in 1987-ish, right about that time. And it was targeted to kind of compete with other keyboards like the Juno 106, which was still in production when this came out. So when you put those two together, in, say, in a music store, and you played them back to back, there was a pretty big difference, not only in feature set, but in sound. We'll talk a lot about the sound and what makes this keyboard sound the way it sounds as we go on through the video. Starting with just the keyboard itself, it went through a couple of different changes. This particular one that we have here is the metal chassis ESQ-1. There's not too many of these out there. Most of the ESQ-1s that you find on the used market are going to have a plastic chassis. And of course, Ensoniq changed the production of this to kind of save some costs along the way because they were a starting company. They just kind of got things rolling with the Mirage sampler. And they pictured this being a roadworthy keyboard with a metal chassis. As they started selling them, they realized, you know what, let's cut the cost down a little bit, get a little bit more money for us. So they went to plastic chassis. Anyways, enough about the chassis. The internal engine itself is pretty awesome. This has got 3 oscillators and an analog filter. The oscillators themselves have, of course, your sawtooth, pulse, sine, etc., things that you would typically find in a synthesizer of this era. But it also offered other things like waveforms, other kinds of waveforms that were like voice or bass or different types of like elements of like a more metallic nature. I think they were trying to kind of absorb some of that PPG thing into this incorporation with your typical sawtooth, etc., etc. So the fact that each one of these oscillators, all 3 of them, can have variables as far as sawtooth, pulse, and metallic textures, I mean, that was pretty outstanding. You could really mix and stack a really great sound on this keyboard. Add to that analog filter, now you're talking some pretty good business here. The sound of the engine itself, this is what makes it so unique. Ensoniq as a company was started by the Commodore 64 people, or some employees from the Commodore 64 team. They ventured off to create musical instruments, and Ensoniq became the brand that they developed. So Robert Yanis, who designed the Commodore SID chip, designed the dock on this, the digital oscillator. So when you hear the keyboard, and this is why you find a lot of love for it online, when you hear the keyboard, you're going to hear some grit, some lo-fi type of sound because of that DOC chip. I think it's called the 5503 DOC chip. If you place this against any other synthesizer of the era, it is going to sound more gritty, more gnarly, and that's what makes it so awesome. Can it do smooth stuff? If you really try, yeah, it can. But it's really kind of known to do its particular thing. You do have a couple different modes on here. You can switch it from polyphonic to monophonic, which is cool. And of course, they added that sequencer, which is pretty awesome. Very limited sequencer by today's standards, obviously. But back in the day, to do a little quick thing, it was really nice, and it paved the way for the sequencing on the future Ensoniq keyboards. So if you read a lot on forums about Ensoniq in general, you'll find a lot of love out there for the sequencing. A lot of hip-hop, legendary hip-hop albums were made on Ensoniq EPSs, EPS 16 pluses, and of course the legendary ASR 10. That was the sampler of the 90s, right? Well, the sequencer inside this ESQ-1 was kind of like the starting point for the sequencing engine that they developed throughout the years. And it kind of operates the same way as the sequencer on an ASR-10. Let's go back and talk a little bit about the company in general. Ensoniq started with the Ensoniq Mirage in 1985. And that was the very first sampler that really offered sampling capability in a very modest footprint at an extremely low price point. $1,500 street price was the target price for that sampler. And although it was only 8-bit, it was competing with other samplers of that era, like Fairlight, which was thousands upon thousands of dollars, the emulators, which sounded amazing but were thousands upon thousands of dollars. So the Mirage really took everybody by storm because now you can sample everything you wanted to sample at home at a fraction of the price. Did it sound as big, bold, and awesome as an emulator or a Fairlight? Heck no. But it had its own sound, and that sound is legendary. There's still a lot of love out there for the Mirage sampler series because no matter what you throw into it, a drum loop or a bass line, it really kind of envelopes it into its own different thing. Gritty, gnarly, dirty is what they do, and they do it really, really well. Just right after the Mirage came out, they released this ESQ-1, which is their first synthesizer. And you know, quite a synthesizer it was. It really took everybody by storm because, again, there was really not much on the market that offered what it offered at that kind of price point. Throughout the years, Ensoniq went on to develop really great items like the VFX Transwave synthesizer is a really kind of like an underdog out there for synthesis composers. It offers a lot of great things for what it does in its own unique way. Of course, the ASR-10, legendary sampler. Where would hip-hop be without that sampler? I don't know, but I'm glad it came out. And they also went on to develop other things like effects processors. The DP4 processor is a quad processor that had amazing, really good sounding reverbs and delays. It's also good to note that the ASR-10 had the DP chip for effects in it. So not only do you get that awesome sequencer, that great sampling sound from Ensoniq, but now you got the DP series effects processors in it. That was fantastic. Towards the middle 90s, they started having some difficulty as a company. I think by that point, other manufacturers started, taking a hint as to what Ensoniq was doing and doing very well, and they started adopting some of those things with their keyboards, for example, Roland and Korg and so on. So sales were starting to kind of dwindle down, and they released a couple of duds along the way. So as a company, they were kind of struggling financially. Right about the late 90s, another company bought them out, and they developed something completely different, which was called the Paris hard disk recording system. Now, if you remember Pro Tools mix systems or Pro Tools HD systems, Ensoniq had their own version of that, which had DSP cards and interfaces I/O. To install on a PC, most notably. And that DAW sounded really, really awesome. So if you take that big, punchy, bold tone from sampling on an ASR-10 and you magnify that times a multi-track recorder to do a whole session with, that's the sound you got in the Paris system. I still think that some of the recordings I used to do on a Paris system sound just as good as two-inch tape. And it really was that awesome. After that, they came out with a couple of dud keyboards, and that's kind of when they merged with EMU. That was a big kind of fiasco thing. But anyways, Ensoniq went by the wayside eventually, which is really sad because it was such a great company. And in that short amount of time that they were doing business, I would say, 12, 14 years, in that time span, they created some really amazing instruments, amazing tools that people still use today for production, professional production. And it all kind of started with the Mirage and the ESQ-1. Awesome keyboard, awesome company. So we found out a little bit more about Ensoniq as a company. Let's hear this ESQ-1 in action. Check it out. Well, I hope you enjoyed checking out this Ensoniq ESQ-1 and got to hear a little bit more about the history of it and the company. Really fantastic synthesizer. As always, thank you for watching. We appreciate you checking it out. AlamoMusic.com, hop on that website, and the Alamo Music Sound Lab, obviously. Click subscribe on the YouTube channel. We've got a lot of great videos coming in the future. Once again, thanks for watching. I'm Roland Pettis. Have a great one.